Hi, good morning. This is Tom Pullen from Acumen. Also on the line with me this morning is Brad Arterberry. And today we're talking about the Acumen software suite for open plan users. So if you're an open plan user, you'll definitely get a good benefit from this presentation. If you're not, or you're soon to be an open plan user, you'll still get good benefit. We have two parts to the presentation this morning. Brad's actually going to kick it off shortly with a discussion of the Acumen software and the Acumen company itself. And when he's completed those items and that background, I'll actually be demonstrating our software using open plan files. So over to you, Brad.
All right, thanks, Tom. And just as an introduction, my name is Brad Arterberry. I'm the Business Development Manager at Acumen for our government sales vertical. Tom Poland, who was just speaking, is our Director of Professional Services. For a quick housekeeping item, there's a control panel for GoToMeeting in the upper right-hand portion of your screen. You can minimize that using the orange arrow. You can raise your hand to ask a question or type the question in the chat, and we'll be sure to save time at the end for Q&A to respond to all the chat questions. Really, the presentation will spend maybe 5 to 10 minutes in PowerPoint just sort of introducing you to Acumen as a company and our products, but then spend the majority of our time in demonstration and Q&A. So a little bit more about Acumen. We are primarily a project management software company. We're really founded on two core concepts. One, the success of the project requires a sound, quality, well-built plan, and that plan must take into account consideration of risks. We have 25 years of thought leadership in the industry. We're trusted by a lot of the major aerospace and defense companies, government agencies, Fortune 500 companies. You see a list of just a sampling of those companies here on the right-hand portion of the screen. So I mentioned we're founded on a concept that that planning is important. Paramount to that is the schedule. So the schedule is a way to forecast estimates for durations, and in sequencing the work, you're able to forecast the the total length of the project. You're able to assign resources based off of that schedule, and really in that planning process and building the schedule, you're defining more fully the scope of the plan, and in doing that, you're able to better communicate with the stakeholders. So the schedule is vital, but it's not all great in that typically you're viewing a schedule through Gantt charts. Gantt charts are highly vertical. They if you're looking at a schedule with thousands of lines of activities or tens of thousands of lines of activities, you end up having to summarize that to see it visually in a Gantt chart, and you lose a lot of the detail in the summary. Also, with very large schedules, there's a lot of logic, relationships between the activities. That adds a lot of complexity to the schedule as well. So viewing in the Gantt chart is not necessarily, while certainly beneficial, is not necessarily the best approach. We've built software tools around letting you visualize the information a little bit better. And to that point, we adhere to a schedule maturity framework model called the S1 to S5 model. So the S1 level is the most basic level. So this is using a standard CPM tool to build the schedule. It's standard cost inputs from a standard cost tool. Very simple risk inputs. That's sort of the most basic point. From there, you'll want to critique those inputs using a tool like Acumen Fuse. So Acumen Fuse allows you to run that information through it, look for common issues in schedule quality, also be able to look at schedule performance, cost performance, earned value, industry standard metrics like the DCMA 14-point assessment. So you'll want to critique those inputs, make sure you have a truly sound plan. That's key to moving on to the next step, the S3 level being a risk-adjusted schedule. The reason why that's so important is in risk simulation, you're adhering to any of the issues in the schedule, like constraints or open ends. All of those still exist in the simulation because it's all based off the original schedule. So you want to make sure you have as clean a schedule as possible before you go run simulations in a risk tool like Acumen Risk. Additionally, Acumen Risk can be your risk register, or it can accept inputs from an external risk register. Now, the next step in the maturity framework is optimizing that plan. So once you've run the risk analysis, typically there's more risks or more threats than opportunities, and your probabilistic dates are going to be somewhere off to the right of your deterministic dates. You'll need a way to optimize back to your original plan, typically. Acumen 360 allows you to do that in an intelligent and somewhat automated way. And then, of course, the S5 level is taking those inputs back out to the project stakeholders, validating that, and getting stakeholder buy-in. In each one of those steps, in the 3 products that we sort of built around those steps, they all accept inputs from a number of common schedule, cost, and risk tools. So you see here a lot of the scheduling tools that we integrate with, most important for this webinar, OpenPlan, some common cost tools like Cobra, Prism G2. Also important, some open standards like UN CEFACT, which is especially important for federal government agencies. We allow you to import a UN CEFACT XML, or if you're using OpenPlan, bring in your OpenPlan schedule and export out a UN CEFACT XML for a delivery to your agency that you might be supporting. Additionally, we integrate with Excel. So if the data doesn't exist in one of those other formats, you can bring in the information through an Excel and run analysis against it. Acumen Fuse is the first product we're going to look at in the demonstration. So Acumen Fuse, really, there's 3 primary analysis types that you run in Acumen Fuse. The first is diagnostics. So again, you're applying a particular set of metrics against the inputs. Those metrics can be schedule quality, schedule performance, cost performance, earned value, like we mentioned earlier. The real key, though, as opposed to looking at the information for the schedule as a whole and your performance against those metrics, is the ability to slice and dice that information by ribbons or groupings. Those can be anything that's meaningful to you, whether that's WBS levels, resources, or any field that exists in the schedule. You'll be able to drill into those particular elements and continue to slice and dice. The other way you'll cut the information is by time phases, so looking at it by particular time periods and seeing your performance in times, and then being able to drill into those particular time periods and isolate issues, isolate the activities that are driving those issues, and then go back in and correct those within the schedule. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Tom, and we'll actually look at how this runs with OpenPlan in Acumen Fuse.
Okay, thanks, Brad. This is Tom Poland, Director of Professional Services at Acumen. Before my time at Acumen, I was a user of the Fuse product, which I'll be showing off today with respect to OpenPlan. And then also, if we have some time at the end, I'm going to give you a sneak peek of Acumen Risk as well, and how quickly I can run a schedule risk assessment. Brad and I were at the EVM World conference last week. There was a number of attendees, number of presenters from different companies, industry, vendors, etc. And I attended many of the sessions. We hosted a couple of sessions, and a few words kept coming up as we were talking with PARCA and DCMA and a lot of the contractors. And the words that were coming up were efficiency, automation, and it seems like everyone was using the phrase doing more with less. Sequestration has certainly brought cuts across the board to the defense industry. which trickles down through other industries as well. So everyone's looking for the kind of the secret way to do more with less, to rely more on automation and these tools. I've been in this industry for over 15 years, and I've seen an increasing reliance on tools over the last 15 years. However, none like I do right now, where there are staffing cuts at many of the major contractors, and people are these tools aren't simply nice to have anymore. From a contractor perspective, they're a matter of survival. We believe we've got some compelling ways for you, the contractor, to very quickly understand what's going on in your schedule before the government, customer, or audit agencies do that for you. If you've been through a surveillance review, you know that it can be A, very time-consuming, and B, very expensive if there's problems. Not expensive necessarily in terms of fines, although those are possible due to some of the new clauses, but expensive in terms of number of person hours it takes to correct a level 1, 2, or 3 car. So, excuse me, the goal here is to understand what's going on in your schedule and cost system and find and correct problems before they become major issues. Now, I've been part of a monthly data development, information development cycle, probably like most people on this call, and I know that there's not always time to correct problems. One thing I've found is early disclosure of problems with a corrective action plan is also a suitable way to defer and deflect the expense that can be associated with having to mitigate and close a car. Normally, for a contract that's held to the CPR did, or now the IPMR did, normally disclosing that information in the Format 5 is a good way to go. Anyway, also, the other hot topic at the EVM World last week was the CEFACT format. Brad mentioned this earlier. It's one of our inputs and outputs. So our tool allows prime contractors and government to take CEFACT files from the subcontractors and analyze them. And then also here I'll be showing you the ability to take your open plan schedule and convert it to a CEFACT file in Fuse, and even analyze the CEFACT file so that you can see exactly the same fidelity of information that the government and audit agencies are seeing on your files. For me, that's always a good feeling, knowing what they're going to see before they see it. So anyway, my demonstration here has started with a little bit of talking, but I just wanted to set a foundation and talk about some of the things that Brad and I saw at EVM World last week. If you're seeing my screen, you can see that I have the Acumen Suite open. One thing that you might notice right away, and Brad talked about our S1 to S5 maturity framework. I have that very well represented here across the top of my screen. In fact, it's no coincidence that they're pretty well logically organized left to right. S1 to S5, and then some other fun tabs here over on the right, which we'll be talking about as well. So as you're working with the software and the 3 different tools, you can see visibly how you're moving across that maturity model. Now, I've opened a schedule, so you can see a schedule opened from OpenPlan. I'm actually going to be opening one in a few minutes, so don't be concerned that I've gotten too far ahead or anything like that. You haven't missed anything. I'm going to be opening a snapshot. Basically, what I've done so far is I've used this OpenPlan button to browse into my OpenPlan database, and OpenPlan users, you might recognize that I have some of the sample files here as well as some of my own creation. I've simply selected one, and I've selected the one called Initial Plan, and it's come into the system here. Like I said, I'll be opening current schedule in a few minutes here. Once I'm here, I took a quick step to organize by phase, which is one of the fields that I have in my schedule. I can group by my WBS, I can group by an alternate WBS, I can group by a field like CAM, which is Control Account Manager, phase as I have here, location, responsible department, anything that I want, just to establish a hierarchy for my data. So you can see here's my phase names down here, and then I can expand each one of those and see what's beneath there. In total, I have about 65 lines in this schedule. It's not a very large schedule, but if I did have a very large schedule, I might want to use WBS or one of my custom fields to bring it down to kind of a consumable amount of information. And to be honest, I don't spend a lot of time on this screen, but it gives me good confirmation that I've loaded the right schedule, and it gives me access to all my different data columns that are in the schedule. And if I need to see some more that I don't have here, I have a column chooser which gives me access to anything that I have in my database. And you see I have a couple hundred here, some out of the box and some customized from my open plan schedule. So this isn't this S1 screen. We've done our work in the scheduling tool, so it's not too exciting, but it's a very necessary step to bring my project in. Now let's go over to S2 and our maturity framework diagnostics. Things are about to get a little bit more interesting. I've gone here. You can see initial plan, which is the name of my project, and let me start out with some of my schedule quality metrics and just give you an overview. I'd already done some grouping. Let me undo some of the things that I've done here. Here we go. What I've done is I've run what's called the Fuse schedule index for this schedule, which has scored the schedule in a number of different areas. I think there's about 8 or 9 on this particular screen. These are items that we feel it's essential to have covered in your schedule. Number one, it's one of the most foundational elements of scheduling, logic. We don't have a schedule if we don't have predecessor-successor relationships between activities. Now, our missing logic metric tells us when maybe we haven't done that so well, and we need to revisit the logic in our schedule. In fact, 8 missing logic items early in the schedule, that's not doing me any favors. I can tell with certainty. The only thing I can tell with certainty right now is that I have uncertainty regarding my critical path. I might claim to have a critical path, but with missing logic items really throughout the duration of this schedule, I don't know for sure that it is my critical path. Another item I have here is logic density. That's how many relationships I typically have per activity. Well, this one's scoring pretty well. It's telling me that most tasks have a predecessor and a successor, or an average of about 2 or slightly over 2 logic links per activity. Now, the missing logic is going to drive that up a little bit, but I don't think it's going to drive me into an uncomfortable area. I'd get uncomfortable if I started seeing about 10 relationships per activity. That means my network logic might be overly complicated. I expect to see some critical activities, and I do. Frankly, I'm surprised I don't see any critical activities in 2012. That's going to be related to my missing logic. So these metrics are starting to work, or they work together, but they're working against me right now. Hopefully we can fix some of that. Perhaps as a band-aid for some of the missing logic are these hard constraints. Let's click on one of these, and I can see over here the specific activities that have hard constraints on them. Now, I've been a scheduler for a long time, so I'll argue that there is a time and a place for hard constraints. But this is a pretty small schedule at about 64 lines, and to have 4 constraints in here, combined with missing logic and a gap in my critical tasks, I'm starting to see a story here that's probably going to start with the resolution of missing logic and then a relook at these constraints to see if they're really necessary once I've established these logical ties. Where can I start? I can start with these 8 missing logic tasks here. I'm clicking on this so that I can see the listing here. And my next step is going to be to go take a look at those hard constraints and see if I really need them after I've linked up these missing logic items. Now, I've got good news, bad news here on negative float. For one, I only have 1 negative float item on the schedule, and again, I can click here and I can see that item. But the problem I have is this is a baseline. You can see there's a green time now bar, which you probably can't see. When we pull up current schedule, it's going to be more prevalent because that one actually has status on it and is in some form of execution. But here, what I'm saying is I'm going into baseline with negative float. That's not necessarily a good place to be Now, what's also interesting is my negative float doesn't proliferate to the end of the project. Again, missing logic and hard constraints are probably the reason for that. In fact, one of these hard constraints might actually be driving the negative float on this activity. Insufficient detail, we check out here. That pretty much means my durations are short and concise as I expect them. I'm a little concerned here because I'm using, in fact, let me click on some of these lag items. I have a number of activities where I'm using lags. In fact, in 2011, 74% of my activities have lags. What I'm curious about here in this schedule is if these lags are being used in lieu of activities. Looking at that, maybe this schedule, instead of the 64 activities that it has now, maybe it should have closer to 100 activities. I can understand, again, as a scheduler, I use lags. I don't use them very often. I use them when appropriate. But here, I'm surprised to see a high percentage of lags as we are here. And then its brother leads, I'm seeing a few here as well. So I'll definitely want to click here and check those out. Merge hotspots looks pretty healthy. I only have one activity that has more than 2 predecessors. What I get concerned about, and I've been guilty of this plenty of times, is taking a milestone like CDR and attaching 100 predecessors to it. Because the control account managers would always tell me, oh yeah, that needs to be done before CDR. That needs to be done before CDR. Well, when we had a longer conversation, we'd realize it was tied to events leading up to CDR, not just to CDR. We couldn't finish that activity and then walk into CDR at 8 o'clock the next morning. There were intermediate activities that would need to be done. The merge hotspot metric helps me understand where some of those confluence activities and milestones might be. So right now, we haven't really touched any of these buttons yet, and there's a lot here, but we've gotten a lot of good information about this schedule. In fact, we know that this schedule, it needs some more work before we can consider this our project baseline. Although we get a readout on our critical tasks. Like I mentioned, with the missing logic, we really don't know what our critical path is, and it might come by surprise when we do attach these missing logic items. If these were completely tied, we could do some more analysis on our critical path. A, we could make sure that it's not management and level of effort tasks, and then B, we could review it with the program manager to make sure that it matches up with their version of reality. If they don't believe that the critical path is what they expect it to be, it either means they don't understand the plan very well, or the plan isn't created very well according to their vision. And that's what a study of these metrics will help us do. Now, one of the big problems with a schedule can be constraints, of course, missing logic. And you may have noticed by now, down at the bottom, I have a series of categories: characteristics, duration, logic, lags, constraints. In these tabs, I can learn more about any one of these items. In fact, let's go to constraints. Let's see if I have any soft constraints, and let's see what kind of constraints I'm using here. So I go down here and I click the Constraints tab. I'm clicking Fuse up here. And now you can see, in fact, if you've been scheduling for some period of time, you might recognize a lot of these constraint names: as late as possible, finish on or after, mandatory finish, which we don't usually like to use, must start, mandatory start. Here's those hard constraints and soft constraints kind of come to life here. So I can click on each one of them, and I can see the particular activity where I have the constraint. So from here, I could have my scheduling tool open as well, and I can start using logic in lieu of these constraints. We also have a cleanser, so we could see the version of our schedule if these constraints weren't used at all. If we have time, we'll go through the schedule cleanser. Another screen that I'll point out before I talk about how this screen can be configured is the DCMA 14-point assessment. My guess is that most open plan users are in the defense industry and perhaps subject to the DCMA 14-point scheduling assessment. We have that here in Fuse. In fact, we have a couple different methods depending on how you define your LOE tasks as well. This works exactly the same way as the other screens, but we're going to give you an edge, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. So I click on logic, and I can see my missing logic items. I can click on lags, and I can see my lags. This works the same way as the other screen that I showed you before. But with all of our screens, I can do something else as well. Let me do this quickly by resources. This is the same view, but let's look at this ribbon analyzer over here to the right. I've been clicking around down here in this time-phased view of my metrics. Let's look at the aggregate view of my metrics, and you can see the 14 points numbered across the top, and you can see based on color sensitivity how I've scored on those different areas. Now this is one project. How do I have all these line items? Well, you may have seen me click on resources, and this is how the tasks that have these resources assigned have scored. Frankly, I'm not happy. I'm seeing the same thing as you are. I'm seeing a lot of red right now. There's a lot of work to be done. We tend to demo that way because if these were all green, this would be a much shorter, less informative presentation. This is how my schedule has looked as well. So I can go to any of these items over here on the ribbon analyzer. For instance, these 16 items that the design team is assigned to that have lags on them. Actually, there's 16 lags utilized across 14 tasks. And we can look at those one by one, and we can question those. Are those lags necessary? Now, if the answer is yes, and I'm doing my own internal surveillance, or the customer is coming in, or DCMA is coming in, I want to explain, I want to document why I'm using those lags. Because I know from the DCMA perspective, I'm scoring 80% in this area on lags. I can annotate those items. I can write my explanation of why I'm using that lag. Maybe we're waiting for government furnished equipment, or maybe we're waiting for the government to approve our CDR documentation, and there's a 30-day commitment on the review, so we want to use the lag. I can type in here, waiting for government review, waiting for the mail, waiting for whatever it is that we're waiting for on this. That way, when I run reports and I'm doing analysis, and they question an item, I can say, well, on my report here, you can see I've annotated that item. We're using that lag as a waiting period for the government furnished equipment. They might agree or disagree, but you've used the system here to annotate why you're using that lag. And that might, pardon the term, but that might just be your get out of jail free card, that you've A, done the diligence, but B, you've actually documented it within your analytical model here, so that when you're questioned about it, you have an answer right away. It's always better to have an answer right at the table than to have to go do research on it. Again, the 14 points works like any one of the screens. Here, let me go back to that schedule quality screen. This is kind of my home base. I've got something else here, though. Not only do I have these tabs that arrive out of the box with Fuse, I have hundreds of metrics in my metrics library over on the left-hand side. Some of these you might recognize from the tabs down below. We have some other industry standards here as well. We have a full set of GAO scheduling metrics. We have these nuclear metrics. We have the DCMA metrics. And within these categories, we have hundreds more. So if I want to be more specific on my quality score, this is one that I usually add to my screen, is soft constraints. Let's add this to the ribbon analyzer. Let's add this to the phase analyzer. Go back here, and now you can see I've added the soft constraints item to my screen. I can save this as a workbook or even as a metrics template so that as I continue to use the software and come back to it month over month to analyze my in-progress schedule, I have my own schedule quality screen where I didn't want any soft constraints as well as hard constraints. Now, one thing that sharp-eyed viewers you have usually picked up on by now, but maybe not because I know there's a lot going on here, is the score over on the right-hand side. Now, scoring is a tricky business because the score is only as strong as what's important to you. Now, today, talking to open plan users, which again is typically a defense industry audience, there are certain things. There are the 32 criteria. There are scheduling guidelines that DCMA and the GAO publish. So we do have, with this audience, we do have a more consistent way of looking at things. So you can decide if internally you want to score yourself on the DCMA 14-point assessment, or you want to create your own custom metric screen, as I've sort of done here by adding soft constraints, and come up with your own criteria for scoring. This schedule scored 35% across these metrics. Based on the amount of red and yellow that I'm seeing, that's a fair score. You might decide, though, that you have reason on your schedules to have hard and soft constraints, and they aren't a problem for you. You can remove them from this view, and they won't be accounted for in your score. In fact, in this case, my score would probably go up if I removed those items. I want to keep them here because they're very important to me. Additionally, if I want to learn a little bit about where that score is coming from, there's an entire scorecard view. In fact, I can undock this. And if I'm curious about why I scored at 35%, I can look at all those red exclamation points. These are my activities, and this is where they failed these various tripwires. In other words, when I click on missing logic, these items with the red exclamation point, if you remember when I clicked the results earlier, I got a listing down here in the lower corner. This is a way where you can look at all the activities and all the metrics at once and see what would come up on those tripwire reports in the lower right-hand corner. So when someone comes to me and says, I don't understand why my score is 35%, this is the view that I pull up. And it usually raises some eyebrows and says, oh, I didn't realize that my activities were not performing to these different metrics. One more thing before I talk about some of the other capabilities here. I've got an earned value section, earned value based on dollars and earned value based on work. I don't have cost information in the schedule, so it didn't do a whole lot for me. Let me find in progress activities. And oh, I'm sorry, this is a baseline. I don't have in progress activities. This is going to be more valuable when I pull in a current schedule in a minute. But so far I've been looking at compliance metrics, but there's no reason why I can't start pulling in, once I have an in progress schedule, why I can't start pulling in performance metrics and look at the SPI and the CPI of my schedule and cost system right alongside the compliance metrics, so that they're no longer two different exercises. Traditionally, in the environments I've been in, we've spent some time every month working on compliance. That is, if we got drawn randomly for internal surveillance or if we were on a high-profile program. But then every month we also looked at performance. But we never really married the two. But as we found out over time, and I'll show you an illustration of this in benchmarking here, what we started learning is our more compliant schedules that had fewer cars and seamless logic were actually executing better. I'm not going to claim that all our programs executed on time. In fact, I've rarely been on programs that have executed on schedule. But what I have here using the S2 benchmarking capability is a prediction. But it's an informed prediction based on statistical information that we've spent years compiling. My project scored about 37% on that schedule index. The reason why it's different than the 35 is I added soft constraints to mine, and we use a standard set to come up with the schedule index. I made my set a slightly non-standard set. What that's telling me is this schedule is only in the 22nd percentile of schedules that have been submitted to what we call Acumen Cloud. And then based on statistical information from real programs that have been executed in real life, I only have a 24% probability of success. Meaning the thought and the time that went into this schedule and not getting it to a very good level of quality has set the stage for a project that probably won't be executed on time. The diligence that went into creating the schedule may also be the technical and execution diligence that's been put into the project. To put it frankly, we don't have a sound plan. If we don't have a sound plan, we're not going to be able to execute on time. Maybe 24% of the time. I just snuck into the yellow here. But if I'm down in the red, that's going to be a lower probability of success. I love it when I take a schedule and it benchmarks in the 90% zone, because then what we can do is we can focus on the steps needed to actually execute the project and not spend our time early in the project defining what our critical path really is. Speaking of logic and critical paths, I have another tab here. And this is an amazing amount of detail regarding the logic that's going into this schedule. One of the first things I mentioned once I got done talking about EVM world was how logic defines a schedule. And without logic, we don't have a schedule. So we've given you this entire S2 logic tab to look at all the different relationship types that are utilized in my plan, also my lags and leads, my schedule redundancy. That's how many paths are multiplied throughout my project. So if I have 3 steps, A, B, and C, and they're linked together, do I have a redundant link between A and C? That's what this is telling me. When I have those redundant links, for those who've tried to trace critical path with redundant links, you know well, it becomes very difficult. You end up doing this trial and error exercise just to identify what your critical path really is. Here we show you those redundant links, and then we also give you the capability to remove the insignificant redundant paths, the non-driving redundant paths, and that's what that schedule cleanser that I mentioned earlier. Circular logic, open ends, some of the other no-nos here like logic on summary tasks rather down in the detail. I don't want summary tasks showing up on my critical path. That doesn't mean anything to me. Out of sequence logic, start to finish type logic, and then open starts and finishes where the there might be a logical link, like a finish to finish relationship or a start to start relationship between the 2 tasks, but you can see in the picture here, this first task, the finish date isn't driving anything. It has no relationships tied to it. Now that raises an interesting question. If there's no successor tied to my finish date, why am I doing the activity? Why do I have resources on the activity? Well, I'll bet there's a good answer for that. We just don't have the logic in place to be able to show that link in the schedule. And it could, in fact, be a critical path item, which due to the fact that it's a dangling activity or an open finish, doesn't end up appearing on the critical path. I'm going to zoom ahead here. In fact, I'm going to pull in, I mentioned earlier that I'm going to open a snapshot. I said that this one that I have open now is a baseline, and conveniently I have an open plan schedule called current schedule. I'm going to open that as a snapshot. Let me import that. It's going out to my open plan database. It's reading the file. It's reading the calendars first, then it's reading in the activities, so that I get the full fidelity of the open plan database right here in Fuse. In fact, I've noticed something right away. The activity count has gone from 65 to 67. I think there's been some added activities. Maybe there's been some removed activities and more were added. The other thing I want to find out is how this is progressing, finish date slipping. The first thing I can do is I can go out to diagnostics, and you can see my screen's a little bit different now. I have initial plan, but then I also have the current schedule. In fact, here's that green time now line that you can see here. I could double click either of these titles to drill into them, or what I commonly do is I look at my ribbon analyzer out here, and I can spot some trends. I've tied a little bit of my logic, but I still have 10 missing logic items, and this program's in some phase of execution here. This should be getting done, and this should be tied out. And 2013 also got busier from a timeline standpoint than it was planned to be in the baseline as well. So that benchmarking exercise came to life where it said I only have a 24% chance of completing on time. I'm not going to complete on time here. I can tell that right away. In fact, I've picked up a number of negative float items. Something I can do now, this might be more effective with more snapshots, but I can do a trend analysis. And let's use negative float. Oh, let me click Fuse here. And this is a very simple trend. I have 2 data points. But what you can see is I've gone from 1 negative float item to 16 negative float items between the initial plan and the current schedule. Now I know I've got a lot going on here, and there's so much analysis I can do. I'm actually grouped by phase here, but just to look at the basic details here, I've gone from 1 to 16. In fact, if I had loaded in a series of snapshots, I could see how the negative float eroded over time. I say eroded because we don't want more negative float. We want less negative float every single time. We want positive float, 0 negative float items. So I can line up these different snapshots. I used to use a 12-month view where I can look at 12 months at a time and really see where I'm heading. That's very compelling information. It's one thing to tell a program manager that we have negative float. They hear that every day on every project. It's another thing to say, we're picking up 3 negative float activities every month. If we're to forecast that on into the future, there's no way we're going to finish on time. That's more compelling information. In fact, it's an analytical conclusion based on trends. Again, I'm just scratching the surface here because I'm just using 2 snapshots. The real reason why I pulled in the second snapshot wasn't just to show off these fancy charts, but it's also to show you forensics. I collected as many as 30 subcontractor schedules every month on my larger programs. It's very difficult to open 30 Microsoft project schedules every month, or open plan or Primavera schedules, and figure out what's changed month to month. In fact, from my determination, without using the method I'm going to show you here, it's impossible. What I have is I have that initial plan or that baseline, and I have the current schedule. These could be mine, or these might be something submitted by a subcontractor. I can very quickly go in and look at the added and removed activities. Remember our activity count went up by a couple? Here's the added activities. It's showing me the description. It's showing me that it wasn't an initial plan, but it's giving me the green check mark to show that it's in the current schedule. Now, you, like me, might be in a very strong, rigid change control environment, especially if you're working government contracts. We just can't add activities and put resources on them and make them part of our budget. I can take my added and removed activities and make sure that they're accounted for in my baseline change documentation. This helps me verify the integrity of my Format 3 every month. Modified relationships, modified resource assignments, modified calendars, just like the added removed activities. In addition, any field in my schedule, both out-of-the-box fields and any custom fields that I want to add to this list using this More button, I can add. I can track changes to phase. If an activity has moved between phases, that's a scope change. And I want to know about it, and I want to make sure that my documentation is updated accordingly. Also, I can look for indicators of progress, like changes to early finish dates. And I have 62 in a group of 64, which is a 95% change in my early finish dates from the baseline to the forecast. Guess what? That's not good news. That's bad news. Those dates didn't get earlier. In fact, I can see the worst offenders right here. I've had activities here move by as many as 500 days. Remember that missing logic? Well, this activity got to move for 500 days, but my schedule, I think it only slipped a year. But this activity slipped a few years. So that's a problem. And this is an indicator of why that missing logic has really not shown me the impact of what's going on in my schedule. In fact, I'm suspecting already that this schedule isn't going to finish in 2013, even though that's the new finish date. I think it's going to finish further out into the future. And I'm going to show you a way that we can figure that out in a minute or two. One more thing. I'm going to move pretty quickly off forensics here. Think of this as a way to tell what's changed between any 2 or more schedules. I just happen to have 2 here. We'll make a brief stop over on the metrics editor. You might remember this library from earlier on the diagnostics screen. This is where all of the metrics are defined, including what makes them red, yellow, and green when you see that on your screen. Your yellow might be my red, vice versa. You get to define that here. Also, all of the metrics that we provide you in the tool were written in the metrics editor. So you can see all of them, and you can write your own accordingly and add these to the library as well. We don't have any special powers that we don't also give you here in the metrics editor to measure your work, your performance, and your quality. One thing we're very serious about is being able to get information out of the tool. It's great to have Fuse. We love it when you have Fuse. But we know that some of your stakeholders aren't going to have Fuse. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get back out of the trend analysis here. I'm going to go back to what I'll call my more traditional view. In fact, I'll even get rid of my chart. If I want to take this information and send it to a stakeholder or send it to a subcontractor that's not using Fuse, I have a publish button. In fact, on all of the screens that I've shown you so far, there's been a publish button in the upper right-hand corner. Normally, I can publish to Excel in a couple different ways here. In fact, one has more detail than the other. But what's really compelling to me is this executive briefing. In fact, I'm going to run this. This is going to create an English language, verbal, and pictorial briefing based on the way that I've set up this screen. It showed up on my screen in a PDF file. I can also do this in Word. And it's giving me the trend analysis. And it's telling me about all these no-nos in here that are red, and if they're getting better or worse. It's giving me some of the pictures, but it's doing it in English. If you're an open plan user, you probably speak the same language that I do out here with the numbers and the red, yellow, green. If you need to present this information to a program manager or other stakeholder, they might not be quite as into scheduling as you and I are, and they might need some help. And what we do in this document is we tell you what things mean. We tell you how much, how bad, how good, and we do it according to the way that you've set up the screen. So if I've organized this screen by resource, I'm going to get the report by resource. If I do it by WBS level 3, it's going to be written at WBS level 3. If I just want to do it at the project level, that's going to be great for those executives who just want to know what's going on at the most basic level in the project and don't have time to get into the detail that you and I as analysts have. Okay, I'm going to do something else here. I'm going to move over into Acumen Risk very briefly. This is a full Monte Carlo based risk simulation tool. As Brad mentioned earlier, we have, I'm going to group by phase, we have the ability to maintain your entire risk register in here. We use a risk driver Monte Carlo process to where you can see the real impacts of your risks through the Monte Carlo simulation in addition to your duration uncertainty. So you can have it both ways. You can use these sliders to set uncertainty on individual tasks or groups of tasks, and then you can also have those documented risks in your risk register affect your simulation as well. I don't have time to do a risk demonstration today, and I've already shared a lot of information with you. But what I am going to do is I'm going to use the risk advisor. This is going to be my first step risk analysis for this project. In fact, I'm going to do it on my baseline. I don't even want to look at that current schedule again. It's too far, it's too late. I'm going to roll back the clock and pretend that I'm still at the baseline phase. The question I'm trying to answer is what percentage, what chance do I have of executing on time based on the quality that I have? I had some initial information early on. I said there was about a 24% probability of on-time completion. Well, what is my probable date of completion based on that quality? Let's use our Fuse schedule index. I think it was about 37% on this project, and when we pulled up the scorecard view, there was a lot of red. Let's use that quality information to see how much certainty or uncertainty I have with the execution of this project. By the way, this is also a first step SRA, schedule risk analysis, that has justified backup to it because it's based on the low quality of my schedule. So let's calculate the advice. It's coming up with a whole lot of red here and a little bit of green. I'm going to apply these values, and these sliders just jumped. It's just moved the uncertainty on most of my phases to red. There's not good news coming, there's bad news coming when I run this simulation. So I'm going to go ahead and run the risk analysis. It's going to have me save real quick here. And we're going to see how reliable my deterministic finish date is for this baseline. The reliability of the deterministic finish date of my baseline is 0. The system is telling me that I have a much more likely chance of finishing around April 4th instead of January 2nd. It's giving me a worst case finish of May 30th. So that's something. I know with reasonable certainty that I'm not going to be more than about 5-6 months late. Now that's not good news, that's bad news. Now, to fix this problem, we would need to do three things. A, we'd need to go back to schedule quality so that the system wouldn't automatically be pushing these risk adjustment sliders out to red. Second, we would need to have a risk workshop where we identify all the risks on this program and how they would impact the specific scheduled tasks. And finally, we would need to evaluate our view of uncertainty in these different areas. Historical information is gold there because it'll tell us, the historical information will tell us if we're used to completing on time or not. I can load my historical projects into Fuse and make that determination to see if I've been executing on time or have all my schedules ended with negative flow. Finally, I promise I'll take a breath and open up for questions in a minute. Finally, when I want to see the information, I have the S5 dashboard capability, which again, this is a way, I showed you the PDF, which showed in English what my schedule quality was. Well, as you and I know, there's going to be stakeholders that say, don't show me the verbiage, show me the pictures. Show me red, yellow, green, show it to me in simple formats that I'm used to seeing and that are easy to understand at a glance. And we have a dashboard capability here. We give you 14 different layouts and a widget-based system to be able to select what I want to look at in each one of these quadrants. You can see visually here, some of these have more quadrants. Actually, they're not quadrants anymore if there's 8 of them. And then we give you one large one, and we give you some of these layouts in between. By the way, as you created diagnostic screens, if you remember, I added soft constraints to one of the screens earlier. As you create and customize those, you can pull those screens right into the dashboard as well. So you get full control over what you see in the dashboard. And when I save this workbook, my customizations are saved. So as I load new schedules in from month to month, I'm using the dashboard, I'm using the other screens to give me the same consistent level of information every single month that I execute. Okay, that was a really fast, pretty good overview of what we have going in here in the Acumen suite. I didn't touch on 360, which, as Brad mentioned, is that optimization phase. Frankly, we just didn't have time. But I wanted to give you really an overview of that diagnostics piece and how you can get started with improving your schedule quality up front. And at that point, you're ready for the risk and you're ready for the acceleration and optimization. In fact, with my own schedule, you could see I wasn't even ready for the risk exercise. I had so many schedule problems. I had so much red on the diagnostic screen that I really needed to fix the missing logic before I even took the next steps. Okay, so now let's open it up for any questions or comments that you may have. Just you can type them into the chat box, or as Brad mentioned earlier, you can click the raise hand button as well.
All right, and Tom, I have a couple of questions that came through the chat, and I'll ask them to you, and you can address them. Some of them you actually covered after they were answered.
Okay.
But we'll go through them. First one, really basic, is the webinar recorded?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and I think we do a follow-up and we send a link out to everybody.
Yeah, so we'll have that posted on our website for everyone to review again. Second one, this one's for me. This wasn't asked by a participant, but we mentioned in the intro showing you in CEFACT export and import.
Thanks, Brad. I said I was going to mention that, and I didn't. It's so simple that it's easy to forget. To export either of these, I just right-click. Oh, wait, sorry. I got to do it on the main one here. I right-click, and I get export as CEFACT right here. When I do that, it's going to ask me where I want to save it. It has the XML extension all ready to go, and I'll save it to my desktop here. And it comes back and says it's exported correctly. If I'm a prime contractor or the government and I receive CEFACT files and I want to do the same level of analysis that we showed you here, I click on the CEFACT button here with the UN logo on it. I browse to my CEFACT file. There's my initial plan file. I would open that up and it would work just like I showed you with the open plan file today.
Okay, excellent. Next question was around EV metrics. How can I use it to see EV performance?
To see EV performance? Okay, we give you a couple different ways to do that. The real key first is getting your cost data into the system. We can't do EV very well without cost. We have a few different ways to do that. We have a standard Excel file. We have a very specific import geared towards a Cobra cap. Many open plan users are using Cobra, so that's somewhat appropriate to this audience. And then we also have the Prism G2 spreadsheet format. Let me see if I've got one out here real quick, and I'll actually pull up some cost data. Let's see, there's my X12 cap. Prism G2 sample, okay. System just acted a little bit funny. Oh, there it is. Let's promote that out to a project. And let's import that. Sorry, I thought I would be able to do this a little bit quicker. Let me go ahead and import here. And I've got my earned value. Let's see if I have some good earned value information in the Prism G2 sample. Let's go ahead and, let's see, I wanted to go to my earned value tab. Sorry. And you can see I've got some earned value metrics here because I do have cost information. I've got my CPI, SPI, I've got my EAC continuing through the project. You can see I don't have SPI and CPI into 2011 because my progress line is in 2010. Now I can break this out into months. It says it's going to give me a lot of months. Let's do this. Oh, now I've gone back to years because I reset my dates. Well, not to belabor it, but I've got my standard EV metrics here, TCPI, SP and A, as we typically call them. And if I wanted to do something like TCPI minus CPI, I could jump over into the metrics editor and just take those two, make my own metric, and take any two of these or more of them and do any math between them and really make my own independent EACs or TCPI minus CPI, et cetera, to really get down into the analytics, into the nitty-gritty, aside from the standard metrics that we have here.
Okay, good. Two questions that were asked that I think you answered, but I want to make sure we do address them. How do I get the analysis out to report on it? We showed a couple of different report options. There's a publish button in each one of the analysis windows where you can take it out to more common formats like Excel, Word, or PDF.
Yep.
Can I change the colors of the thresholds? You showed that in the metrics editor, so yes, you can change colors on the thresholds, you can change the thresholds, everything about the metrics are customizable.
Yeah, so here, for instance, okay, we don't like red, we don't think it's the worst thing in the world to have high on this item, so we changed the worst case to blue, and we could say, well, 25% is a little conservative, let's make our constraints more than 50% to flag blue, and then we would just change those two items here. We'd have to change some of this other text as well, but fully configurable.
All right, and then last question, do I have to import one schedule at a time?
Let's see. It depends on the tool, really. For open plan, you can do this. And I went through this very quickly. If I have a master project in open plan and it has sub-projects, I can import them all at once. In fact, I can include the subprojects, the ones that are open in open plan if I have open plan open, If I don't have open plan open, which I don't throughout this, I can include all external subprojects. So if I've defined a master project that has 20 or 30 subprojects in it, I can do analysis on all of them at one time with a single import.
All right, great. So those were the questions that were asked. Do you want to go ahead and close this out, Tom, since we're at 11?
Yeah, let me do this. Let me pull up the PowerPoint slide with the contact information. And that's where you can follow up with us, is white papers on our website. We have software trial available. We have a Twitter account. We have a traditional email account as well. There's information on our summit coming up, which is the very end of September, early October. That's all on our website as well. Check that out. The summit is free. It's a great conference, and it's free if you fill out the survey that's out there. And again, there's a ton of white papers out there. We make YouTube videos that show you a lot of the same functionality that you've seen today. And of course, we've recorded this one as well. So thanks, Brad. And thanks, everyone. Have a great day.